Welcome to Fear Spiral. It started with the silence, not the kind of silence you notice after a storm, or when the power cuts off. No, this silence was heavier. It was the kind that pressed into your chest, the kind that made you feel watched even when no one was there. The town of Davenport, West Virginia, wasn't on any maps anymore. Most outsiders never even knew it existed. But for the people who lived there, Davenport was ordinary, too ordinary. Emily, a college journalist, had heard the whispers, stories about a town that people moved to and never left. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. So she went, camera in hand, notebook in her backpack, and a stubborn curiosity that had gotten her into trouble more times than she cared to count. When she arrived, the first thing she noticed was the lack of movement. Shops stood open but empty. A gas station pumped dripped gasoline into the dirt, but no one was there to stop it. Front doors creaked on their hinges. Houses gaped open. But the streets were still, and yet she felt it. Eyes everywhere. Emily whispered to herself, "This town, it feels like it's breathing." Then she heard it. A faint rustle. A low groan, not from a person but from the town itself. The buildings shifted slightly, as if adjusting. The ground pulsed beneath her shoes, almost like the slow beat of a heart. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. She pulled it out, no signal, no Wi-Fi, just one strange notification across the screen. "Welcome back, Emily." Her blood froze. She had never been here before. And then, a shadow moved in the window of the diner across the street. The diner was just a rumor in the small town of Havenwood, just another derelict building in a town full of them. But the day Emily arrived, the bell above the door chimed weakly and beckoned her inside. She hesitated on the curb, staring at the diner window where the shadow had moved. The glass was cracked, smudged with a film of dust and grease that hadn't been cleaned in years. A faded neon sign still flickered above the door, buzzing weakly. "Eat here." She tightened her grip on the camera. If this town has answers, that's where they'll be. The bell above the diner door gave a sickly chime when she pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and something sweeter, rotten, almost like spoiled fruit. Booths lined the walls, but every seat was occupied by mannequins. Plastic figures propped upright in the booths, their stiff arms resting against chipped tables. They were dressed in clothes that looked too real. Faded jeans, flannel shirts, work boots, even jewelry that glittered in the dim lights. Emily's stomach turned. Then one of the mannequins twitched. She gasped, stumbling back. Her camera nearly slipped from her hands. It had been subtle, a jerk of the head, like a puppet string pulled too tight. "Hello," she whispered. Her voice cracked against the walls. And then, in unison, every mannequin in the diner slowly turned their heads toward her. The sound was horrible. The creak of stiff joints, the scratch of plastic grinding against plastic. Dozens of lifeless faces now locked on Emily. Her heart thundered. She backed toward the door, fumbling for the knob when a voice rasped behind her. "We've been waiting for you, Emily." She spun around. There was no one there, just the counter, just an old jukebox in the corner. But the voice lingered, vibrating through the walls, through the floorboards, through her chest. She bolted out of the diner, nearly tripping on the cracked pavement outside. And when she looked back, the mannequins were all standing in the window, pressed up against the glass, watching her. This story is called Mannequin Town. It started out like any normal day for Emily. The sun was shining, birds were tweeting, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. So she decided to go exploring. She wandered into an antique store that had just opened that week. It was filled with dusty furniture and old knickknacks, and in the corner there was a whole display of vintage mannequins. They were dressed in faded clothes, frozen in poses that were meant to be inviting. But something about their vacant eyes and unblinking stares made Emily uneasy. Just as she was about to leave, the store owner approached her, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Don't you want to take a piece of this town with you?" he asked, his voice like sandpaper. Confused, Emily shook her head. "What do you mean?" The old man leaned closer, his breath smelling of decay. "These mannequins, they're not what they seem. They're cursed. And once you bring one home, you can never get rid of it. It'll drain the life out of you, steal your soul and leave you empty inside." Emily laughed nervously and quickly changed the subject, but as soon as she stepped outside, she felt a sudden urge to run. She didn't stop running until she was halfway down Main Street. Her breath clouded in the cold air, her chest tight, legs trembling. The whole town seemed awake now. Every shop window she passed reflected strange shapes that weren't her own. Shadows darted behind the broken glass, too quick to identify. Street lamps that should have been dead flickered on, one by one, casting long beams across the cracked pavement, and then she saw them. Figures, At first she thought they were mannequins too, but these ones were moving slowly, unnaturally. Their limbs bent at odd angles, jerking as if every movement was being forced. Some dragged their legs like they were broken, yet they kept coming. Their faces, Emily's breath hitched. They weren't blank like mannequins. They looked real. Human skin, but stretched too tight, too pale, too still. Eyes that were wide open, staring without blinking. Mouths slack, like someone had forgotten how to shape words. A man in a tattered work uniform limped toward her. His name tag still clung to his chest, Carl, but his jaw was hanging loose, as if unhinged. Behind him, a woman in a nurse's gown shuffled, her head twitching side to side like a broken doll. Emily stumbled backward. "Stay away from me," she screamed. They didn't answer, they only kept coming. The sound of their dragging feet echoed down the empty street. Emily darted into an alley, pressing herself against the cold brick wall, clutching her camera like a weapon. Her mind raced. This can't be real. This town can't be real. But when she peeked around the corner, she saw the townsfolk had stopped in the middle of the street. All of them turned their heads toward her at the same time, dozens of wide, lifeless eyes staring straight at her hiding spot. And then, every single one of them, in the same horrible monotone, whispered, "Don't forget, you belong here too." The bell tower of the old church in Hollow Creek had always been the tallest structure in town. That is, until recently, when some developer came along and built a Holiday Inn. But the developer never finished the job. No one ever stayed there. The hotel stood empty, a stark white blemish against the skyline, a monument to whatever dark purpose the developer had in mind. Emily ignored the stares of the townspeople as she walked past. She was used to it. She'd been gone from Hollow Creek for 10 years. Long enough to forget the sting of their judgmental eyes, or so she thought. She turned toward the old church, its wooden steeple blackened and split down the middle, like it had been struck by lightning years ago. A faint light flickered inside. Curiosity piqued. Emily approached the building. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The church smelled of mildew and old wood. Broken pews lined the aisle. The altar was covered in melted candles, their wax running down like dried blood. Emily felt a sudden urge to flee, but something kept her rooted to the spot. She turned toward the sound of dripping water and gasped. At the very front of the church, hanging where a cross should have been, was something else. A wooden carving of a face. It was enormous. Its eyes were hollowed out and its mouth was open in a silent scream. The worst part, though, was the expression on its face. It wasn't carved like that. The wood looked bent. It had been forced into shape by something unnatural, like the silent scream of a person trapped in a coffin. Emily wanted to get a closer look, so she raised her camera to snap a picture. But just as she did, the candles sputtered to life, glowing a deep crimson. The air grew thick and heavy, and then she heard them again. The voices, but this time they weren't outside the church. They were coming from inside. "Pray with us," they whispered. "Stay with us forever." Emily spun around, desperate to find the source of the voices, but there was nothing there. She backed away from the altar, tripped on a loose floorboard and fell to her knees. As she looked up, she saw them. The candles were no longer on the altar, they were on the pews. And the pews weren't pews at all. They were bodies. Row after row of townsfolk slumped forward like corpses, their heads lifting in unison. Their eyes snapped open and they stared at her. All of them, every single one of them, was focused intently on Emily, and then the wooden face above the altar smiled, the boy in the walls. Until next time, sleep tight and don't let the bedbugs bite. The last thing Emily remembered was stumbling backward as the pews shifted. The townsfolk standing one by one, their joints cracking like dry wood. Their faces were blank, drained of color, eyes glowing faintly red as if lit from within. She dropped her camera, it clattered on the floor and spun toward the doors. But the heavy oak doors slammed shut with a deafening boom. Her breath hitched, trapped. At the altar, the massive wooden face creaked, its jaw widening, splinters falling like teeth. And then, from that gaping mouth, a voice spoke. "We never left. The town remembers for us." Emily's stomach twisted. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The townsfolk answered in unison, their voices layered into one. "We are the forgotten. Hollow Creek keeps us alive." Her heart raced. It wasn't just a town, it was a prison, a memory loop that had trapped its people long ago. As she backed away, her eyes darted to the stained glass windows. They weren't showing saints or angels, they showed her. In each colorful panel, Emily saw herself standing outside the diner, walking down the alley, even entering the church. Her blood froze. This wasn't just a ghost town, it had been watching her every move since she arrived. Suddenly, the townsfolk began to march forward, in perfect rhythm. Their hollow eyes glowed brighter with each step. The floorboards groaned beneath them. Emily's instincts screamed run, or become one of them. She spotted a narrow staircase near the altar, leading underground. Without a second thought, she bolted down, slamming the trapdoor shut behind her. The air below was damp, foul, and thick with whispers. Candles flickered on the walls, revealing stone tunnels carved deep beneath the church. At the end of the corridor, she saw it, an underground chamber filled with hundreds of wooden faces, just like the one above the altar, all staring, all whispering, and in the center, a massive, rotting heart pulsing against the stone. The entire town was alive, literally. The chamber reeked of rot and damp wood. Emily gagged as she inched closer, the sound of that enormous fleshy heart pounding in her skull. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't just beating, it was breathing. Every pulse made the walls tremble, and the wooden faces carved into the stone seemed to writhe, their mouths opening in silent screams. Her flashlight beam caught something glinting on the floor. She bent down. It was a rusted axe, its blade crusted with something black. Her hand shook as she lifted it. She knew what she had to do, but as she raised the axe toward the heart, a voice filled the chamber, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. "Strike, and you become us." Emily froze. The wooden faces were no longer still. Their eyes glowed faint red, and their mouths whispered her name. Emily, Emily, Emily. Her knees buckled, the whispers crawling into her skull like centipedes. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The voice was inside. The pulsing heart slowed, as if waiting for her decision. She raised the axe again, teeth gritted, sweat stinging her eyes. "You won't take me," she hissed. And then, the townsfolk appeared in the tunnel behind her, their hollow eyes glowing brighter, their feet dragging in perfect unison as they filled the chamber. They didn't rush, they didn't scream, they just stood, staring, as if they already knew what she would choose. The heart gave one heavy beat that nearly knocked her off her feet. Thump. The faces whispered louder. "Emily, stay, become one of us." She screamed and swung the axe down. The blade sank deep into the rotting flesh. The chamber shook violently, dust pouring from the ceiling. The heart shuddered, oozing black liquid, its beat faltering. The townsfolk shrieked in unison, their bodies twitching violently, collapsing like puppets with their strings cut. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew sharper, angrier. The faces on the walls twisted, their eyes glowing like embers. "You cannot kill what you live inside." Emily's chest tightened, her skin began to burn, her vision blurring. She staggered back. The heart wasn't dying, it was absorbing her. One of the townsfolk lurched forward, its eyes boring into hers. "Join us, Emily," it rasped, its voice a chorus of the dead. "Become whole." With a final shudder, the heart stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by Emily's ragged breaths. The chamber, the townsfolk, the heart, they were all gone. Only the echo of whispers remained, dancing on her skin like a macabre lullaby. Morning light filtered through the trees, dappling the forest floor where a young woman sat cross-legged, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Sunlight glinted off a necklace nestled against her chest, a pendant carved in the shape of a heart. A single teardrop traced a path down her cheek, disappearing into the intricate tracery of the pendant. As the sun climbed higher, the forest stirred with life. Birds sang, insects hummed, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and pine. Yet amidst this vibrant symphony of nature, an unsettling stillness clung to the young woman, a silent testament to the whispers of the woods. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new stories every week. Also, if you want to listen to more of my scary short stories, check out the playlist in the description. There are currently over 12 hours of terrifying tales just waiting for you to get scared. Now, this story originally appeared on a podcast, so if audio stories are more your thing, there's a link to that in the description too. In fact, I've even been posting my stories there since 2016. So if you want to hear stories like this before anyone else, or if you just want to support me and my work, consider becoming a member. You'll find the link in the description. In the meantime, here are some other stories you might enjoy. In the Darkest Part of the Forest by Gwendolyn Kist, a young girl is kidnapped by a mysterious man who lives deep in the woods. But as days turn into weeks, she begins to realize that her captor may not be as sinister as he seems. From the Darkest Part of the Forest is a suspenseful and atmospheric tale that will keep you guessing until the very end. Then there's The Ritual by Adam Neville. A group of friends go on a hiking trip in the Swedish wilderness, but they soon find themselves lost and pursued by an ancient and evil entity. The ritual is a terrifying story that will make you never want to go camping ever again. And if you need something a little lighter, there's also The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This heartwarming and imaginative story is about a social worker who investigates an orphanage for magical children and the mysterious caretaker who runs it. It says a delightful tale that is perfect for anyone who needs a little bit of magic in their life. The doors of the church opened without her touch. Emily froze on the steps, her breath hitched, her skin prickled as though the entire town held its breath with her. Inside, the glow from the stained glass flickered like firelight. The colors bent and warped, casting shapes on the walls that shifted and twisted like living shadows. The air that drifted out was heavy and cold, carrying the faint sound of voices, not one voice, hundreds. Emily stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath her, but not like wood. It was more like the sound of something exhaling. Every step echoed too long, as if the building was stretching her movements into forever. Rows of pews lined the aisle, but they were not empty. Shapes sat slumped in them, motionless. As her eyes adjusted, she realized they were townsfolk, silent, unmoving, staring straight ahead at the altar. She whispered, "Hello." Not one of them blinked. Her chest tightened. She forced herself to walk down the center aisle, every step heavier than the last. When she reached the front, she saw the altar was cracked open, a dark hollow splitting the stone. From it, a faint red glow seeped upward, pulsing like a heartbeat. The whispers returned, circling her from all directions. Some sounded kind, almost pleading, others hissed with anger. "Join us," they murmured. "Don't fight it. You belong here now." Emily gripped her axe tighter, though her hands shook. Her reflection caught in the stained glass above the altar, but it wasn't her. The face staring back had her eyes, but its smile stretched too wide, its skin too pale. She stumbled backward, bumping into a pew. The townsfolk finally moved. Their heads turned in unison, necks creaking as they all fixed their empty stares on her. No one spoke, but the whispers grew deafening, filling her skull. Emily clapped her hands over her ears, but the voices were inside her now, pressing against her thoughts. For one terrifying moment, she felt her will slipping. It was as if the town itself was trying to crawl inside her mind. "No," she gasped. "You don't get to take me." Summoning every ounce of strength, she lifted the axe above her head and brought it crashing down on the altar. The stone split wider. A deep guttural sound shook the entire church. The glow flared, then spread into the pews. The townsfolk rose as one, their heads tilting unnaturally as if pulled by invisible strings. And then they began walking toward her. The church shook violently. Dust rained from the rafters as the townsfolk shuffled closer. Their footsteps were hollow, echoing like drum beats. Emily gritted her teeth, raising the axe again, but her arms trembled. She couldn't fight them all. The whispers inside her head became a roar. "Don't resist. We are you. You are us." She stumbled backward, her heel catching on a crack in the floor. The altar's glow swelled brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. She realized with sickening clarity this wasn't just a town, it was alive, and it was hungry. Emily's eyes darted upward. Above the altar, hanging crooked in the tower, was the church bell. The metal was tarnished black, but she remembered what the journal had said. The bell can wake or bury the town. If she could ring it, maybe she could break the spell. The first villager lunged. Emily swung the axe, not at them but at the rope dangling from the tower. She hacked once, twice, until the frayed fibers snapped. The bell swung, a sound unlike anything she had ever heard, ripped through the church deep, vibrating, so loud it seemed to shake the marrow in her bones. The glow from the altar sputtered, flickered, then began to fade. The townsfolk froze mid-step, their eyes rolled back, their bodies collapsing into the pews like marionettes with cut strings. The whispers shrieked in fury, 1,000 voices crying out at once. Emily fell to her knees, covering her ears. The sound clawed at her skull, begging to stay alive. Then silence. When she opened her eyes, the glow was gone. The altar was nothing more than cracked stone. The townsfolk sat lifeless, heads bowed. For the first time, the town was truly still. Emily staggered out into the dawn. The streets were empty. No whispers followed her. The weight pressing on her chest had lifted, replaced with an eerie calm. At the edge of town, she looked back one last time. The church bell swung gently in the breeze, its soundless arc a reminder. The town hadn't crumbled, hadn't disappeared. It just waited. Emily whispered, more to herself than anyone. Some things should never be woken. And with that, she turned her back on the town that had forgotten it was alive, praying no one else would ever wander into its silence. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really helps me out.